Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. It is official. It has been announced by the UFC. We are getting an actual super fight. Islam Makhachev will defend his lightweight title against current featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284, February 12th, 2023 in Perth, Australia. This will be the main event. And there has been some people recently, and there's been some cryptic tweets from Islam Makhachev saying, yeah, I don't think Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski is going to happen. Well, now we know for sure it's going to happen. I'm going to give you guys my reaction as well as an early prediction for Makhachev versus Volkanovski. And also, I'm going to tell you guys what I think will happen with the featherweight division now that Volkanovski is moving up to lightweight, maybe permanently, maybe temporarily. But I have a scenario I think the UFC should really do and how the featherweight division should be handled with the jump from featherweight to lightweight for Alexander Volkanovski. But we'll get to that later in the video. First off, one thing I want to say about this fight. This is an actual super fight. The word super fight has kind of lost its potency over the past 5 to 10 years. The actual definition of a super fight is a champion versus champion. And people like to, for some reason, throw around, oh, we're going to get a Nick Diaz versus Anderson Silva was called a super fight, not for a belt. The word super fight originated in the thoughts of a champion versus a champion. Israel Adesanya versus Jan Blachowicz, super fight. But for some reason nowadays, everyone's calling anything that's out of the ordinary a super fight. If anyone's changing a division, it's a super fight nowadays. But this is a legitimate super fight, and I'm really looking forward to this matchup because this is a very compelling matchup. You have Islam Makhachev, who up until recently, people were doubting him and his resume. And I get it. He did not have the best resume, but you had to take into account what he was doing to some of these guys. And I get it. Again, it's not the elite of the elite. But look what he did to Bobby Green. Look what he did to Dan Hooker. And again, I know that was on short notice. Look what he did to Thiago Moises. Look what he did to Drew Dober. Again, I know these aren't the elite of the elite, top 10 of the division, but they were quality fighters, and he absolutely dominated them. And people question, does Islam Makhachev even deserve a title shot against Charles Oliveira? He gets the title shot. In my opinion, he deserved the title shot. And he went out there and he dominated Charles Oliveira. He dominated him on the feet, and he dominated him on the ground as well, and he finishes him in the second round via submission. And not only that, he dropped Charles Oliveira to find that submission. So there's no doubt, people can't question the legitimacy of Islam Makhachev's lightweight title. There's no doubt about it. He beat Charles Oliveira, who was on an absolute tear. And now he's the champion, and he says, you know what? I want to fight Alexander Volkanovski. And Volkanovski's been saying, I want to fight the winner of this fight for a while. He was the backup at UFC 280. So if Makhachev or Oliveira were to pull out, Volkanovski was going to step in and try to become a double champion on short notice, which is absolutely insane. And for Volkanovski, he's been on an absolute tear. He is on a 22-fight win streak, and he's never lost in the UFC, and he has not lost since 2013. So that's absolute insanity. So you basically have a 22-fight win streak from Alexander Volkanovski versus an 11-fight win streak from Islam Makhachev. And Islam Makhachev only has one loss in his career, and that was back in 2015. So he has not lost in 7 years since he got brutally KO'd by Adriano Martins. So this is a very compelling matchup, and skill for skill, it's super interesting because you have Makhachev, who we know the strategy of Islam Makhachev. He wants to go in, he wants to get a hold of you, he wants to drag you to the ground, beat you up, and submit you. But Islam Makhachev, because of his wrestling, his striking is very dangerous because people are worried about the takedown and then they get clipped on the feet. And also his striking is ever improving as well. Look what he did to Charles Oliveira. He was outstriking Charles Oliveira. Now, part of that, I believe, was the threat of the takedown, but also it was just his striking has vastly improved, and he's super defensively responsible. He's always been very defensively responsible. And for Alexander Volkanovski, he's one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world. I think he's even #1 pound-for-pound right now on the UFC's website. And Volkanovski, there were some questions. They said, oh, well, he lost both fights to Max Holloway. I personally thought he won both fights. The second fight was very close. But guess what happened at UFC 276? he went out there and put a hellacious beating on Max Holloway. And now there's no real clear number one contender in the 145-pound division because Volkanovski's beaten Max Holloway. He beat Chan Sung Jung, who didn't really deserve the title shot at the time. He beat Brian Ortega. He has 3 wins over Max Holloway. He has a win over Jose Aldo from the past, and I know Jose Aldo is not in the division anymore. And I know there's a lot of guys kind of making their way up in the featherweight division, which we're going to talk about later in the video. But there's not one contender that really stands out deserving a featherweight title shot right now, because you have, Arnold Allen, who just won a fight, but it's kind of weird circumstances with the injury to Calvin Kattar. You have Yair, who just won a big fight over Brian Ortega, but injury there as well. You have Josh Emmett, who's on a decent win streak, but his last fight, it was a very controversial decision that most people thought he should have lost. So there's really not that concrete contender in the featherweight division. So I get it. There's a lot of guys kind of there that could fight for the title, but there's not one in particular you could really pick out and say they definitely deserve it. And number one ranked is Max Holloway, and he's kind of in a weird position. We're going to talk about him a little bit in this video as well, because there's been talk, Max Holloway lost 3 times to the champ. Now he's got to move up to lightweight. Well, wait a second. Now Volkanovski's moving up to lightweight. So it's a very interesting division at the featherweight division with Volkanovski moving up. I'm going to talk about what's going to happen here in a little bit, but I want to give you guys an early prediction for this fight. I think skill for skill, Alexander Volkanovski is the better fighter. I just think he's more well-rounded. He's got great takedown defense. He's got great wrestling. He's got great jiu-jitsu. He's got great submission defense. He's got great hands. He's got good power. He's got amazing stamina. He's got amazing durability. There's nothing not to like about Volkanovski. And for Islam Makhachev, he's becoming very well-rounded as well, but we know what he wants to do. He wants to drag you down and beat you up and submit you. That's what he wants to do. And when I look at this fight, it's very hard for me to pick Alexander Volkanovski, even though you listen to what I just said. Okay, Volkanovski's the more well-rounded fighter. He's great everywhere for the most part. Why can't he beat Islam Makhachev? I think with this kind of quick turnaround, I know for Volkanovski, technically, he fought in July, so it's not really a quick turnaround for him. But I just don't think, not knowing what's going to go on with Volkanovski's future, and now he's fighting in basically 4 months or less than 4 months, I don't think he has time to put on the bulk that he needs to fight a guy like Islam Makhachev. I think Islam Makhachev is going to be too big, too strong. And my early prediction for this fight is I think Volkanovski is going to fare very well, but I think Makhachev is going to be able to get a hold of him and going to be able to drag him to the ground and eventually either, just going to win a decision with his wrestling or eventually find a submission in that second or third round. I'm not super confident in it, but as far as my method, but I do think Islam Makhachev gets it done. I just don't think Volkanovski can put on the size that he needs to be able to go against a guy like Islam Makhachev, who he cuts down to 55. And I'm not one of these people who are saying Islam Makhachev some crazy weight bully, because everybody does it. But I think Volkanovski is like the perfect size for featherweight. And I think he would need like a year or so to really put on some size to have an effect in the lightweight division. Look at Max Holloway when he went up and fought for the lightweight interim title against Dustin Poirier. The fight was very competitive, but Dustin was just too big, too strong, and too powerful for him. And I think someone like Islam Makhachev is going to kind of have similar problems for Volkanovski. I'm curious, though, if Volkanovski can stuff those takedowns, which could very well happen. Volkanovski has great takedown defense. And, he says, I'm shorter, it's really hard, and if you do get me down, I'm going to scramble back to my feet. If he is able to stuff those takedowns, it might be a very tough night for Islam Makhachev. So this is a very compelling fight, but again, my early prediction is Islam Makhachev. I think he gets it done with the wrestling and size. As far as the featherweight division, what happens with the featherweight division now that Volkanovski's moving up? Well, first off, as far as Max Holloway goes, I think Max Holloway is kind of in a waiting pattern right now, because Max can't move up, because if Volk wins the lightweight title, he's screwed. I think if Volkanovski wins the lightweight title, there's a chance he just vacates his featherweight title, and then Max Holloway can basically regain his featherweight title and stay at featherweight. If Volkanovski loses at lightweight and he comes back down to featherweight, then maybe Max moves up to lightweight after that happens. But, he's going to have to wait to see what happens at UFC 284 as far as Max Holloway. Now, in the meantime, what should they do with the division? Should they make an interim belt? I'm not a huge fan of interim belts, and it's only 4 months away, so why not just hold off on the interim belt? But here's what I think you should do. Josh Emmett's on a decent win streak. I say you do Josh Emmett versus Max Holloway. And I know people are saying, well, if Josh Emmett's in the running for a title shot, why should he fight Max Holloway, who's not even close to a title shot? Because he already has 3 losses to Volkanovski, and the third loss being the most dominant loss of all of them. Here's what I say happens. You do Max Holloway versus Josh Emmett, but you also do Arnold Allen versus Yair Rodriguez. And, that takes the 3 guys who are most deserving of a title shot potentially and kind of puts them in a little tournament. If Josh Emmett beats Max Holloway, Josh Emmett is guaranteed a title shot when Volkanovski comes back, or if they do an interim shot, or they do a vacated belt and they have to, fight for a vacant belt. If he beats Max Holloway, he's the number 1 contender. There's no doubt about that. If Max Holloway beats Josh Emmett, then what you do is the winner of Yair versus Arnold Allen fights Volkanovski for the featherweight belt when he does eventually come back down to the division. Or you have Max Holloway fight that winner if Volkanovski does not come back down to the division, if that makes sense. So I hope that makes sense. But again, just to clarify, you do Max Holloway, Josh Emmett. If Josh Emmett beats Max Holloway, he fights Volk when Volk comes back. For Max, if he wins, he can fight for a vacant belt if Volk doesn't come back. But if Volk does come back, the winner of Arnold Allen versus Yair Rodriguez would fight for the belt. And then if Volk doesn't come back, you would just match up the 2 winners of both those fights to fight for the vacant belt. I hope that all makes sense. But I just really think that's what you should do with the division. I don't think you should make an interim belt in the meantime because Volkanovski is very active. So if he loses this fight, I think he'll come back and it kind of be like Israel Adesanya when he lost to Jan Blachowicz, where he'll kind of come back and just defend his belt right away afterwards as long as he doesn't take too much damage in that fight. So I don't want to see an interim belt made right away, especially considering it's only 4 months away. As far as the lightweight division, because there's one more thing I want to talk about in this video before I end it. After this fight between Makhachev and Volkanovski, unless there's some controversial decision or controversial ending in this fight or an injury or something along those lines, and depending on what happens in the meantime, if he takes a fight or not, I think Beneil Dariush needs to fight for the title after Volkanovski. Beneil Dariush needs to fight the winner of Makhachev versus Volkanovski. Now, I know in the meantime, Beneil said, I'll fight anyone. So there's a chance Dariush maybe fights the winner of Chandler Poirier, or maybe fights Rafael Fiziev, and maybe he loses. Obviously, in that scenario, he wouldn't be the number 1 contender. But I understand that Volkanovski, he's been a dominant champion. He's been asking to have a shot at a second belt. So you can't not give Volkanovski this shot. But Beneil Dariush, with that win over Mateusz Gamrot, with the streak that he's on, I think you have to give Beneil Dariush the next title shot after Volkanovski fights Islam Makhachev at UFC 284. So I think that's everything as far as covering everything regarding Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 284. Let me know who you guys are predicting to win this fight. Are you picking Makhachev? Are you picking Volkanovski? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.